Right, let's see if this is working. I'm going to quickly refresh my channel content page. Okay, it's not coming up in my videos, but it is coming up in my live. So I am currently live, and I'm going to turn my monetization on so I get money. Yep, so we're currently live. I will wait for us to get any sort of comments or things like that, but I'm currently live on YouTube, so I'm going to quickly find a link and post it in my couple of servers I'm in, a couple of Discord servers I'm in. Let me just quickly refresh the page. It says I'm live. Right, I have one bit. Okay, here we go. We've got Proxima Centauri says, hello, how are you doing? I am doing very well, my friend, thank you. How are you? Yeah, I'm just currently putting in a couple of Discord servers I'm in that I am currently live. Yep. So today, if you can't already tell by the thumbnail and by some other stuff, so like the tier list that I've currently got on the screen. Sorry, I'm kind of half writing down in loads of Discord servers and stuff while I'm in the middle of trying to deliver a piece. So yeah, this tier list we're going to be doing is about underrated and overrated Formula One drivers. So what I've done, is that you probably know me on Discord as RB26. We watched the Daytona 500 on Discord this week. Okay, so you're him. Hello, and hello to Andre Sab as well. Yeah, so basically this video, or this live stream, should I say, which will eventually turn into a video, is going to be ranking a select handful of drivers, and by a select handful, it's every driver who's either won a Formula One World Championship or come second in a Formula One World Championship. So that's what it's going to be, and we're going to basically say, are they? You've got all the rankings here. I'm not sure exactly what you guys can see, but you can see extremely overrated, quite overrated, somewhat overrated, fairly underrated. So I've gone from somewhat overrated, actually fairly rated is what I should have put there. For some reason I didn't put rated, I just put fairly underrated. Fairly rated, somewhat underrated, quite underrated, and extremely underrated. So we've got a handful of drivers here. So as I said, every driver who's either won a Formula 1 World Championship or finished second in a Formula 1 World Championship. It's not the most. I could go on and put like every driver who's finished third and every driver who's finished fourth, and then it just turns into a massive 2-hour long live stream. Are these only World Champion drivers? No, as I said, I've just corrected exactly what it is. But I'm sure you guys know that. So yeah, this will be hopefully an interesting video. I'll wait till we get a couple more people in because we are now at 1 minute past 2, so we are on time. But yeah, yeah. So we've got, you can see we've got all of the drivers here. Hopefully you guys can't see any of the adverts on the side of my screen because I've zoomed right in because I don't want all of the companies that pay for the adverts on the website to get some free advertising because I'm mean. But yeah, I'll wait for more people to get in as we wait for what will be hopefully an interesting video, because I will actually, just before we get into this is a very good opportunity. This is all based on opinions. I will say this because it's going to turn into a proper video rather than just a live stream. I don't know why it's just refreshed. It's just what on earth is going on? Don't you dare tell me it's going to refresh and I'm going to have to re-upload everything I've just done. Oh, for goodness sake. I've got to redo my entire... I've got to... Because I put on some extra screenshots for... Yeah, so basically it's taken me down some link to a virus. That's fantastic. I love it when that happens. Oh, for goodness. Technical difficulties here, lads and ladesses and everyone else in between. I don't care what you identify as. Right, so I've got to quickly go and add those pictures that I added in because I basically took someone else's tier list and added a bunch of drivers in. So I'm going to quickly highlight all of those. There we go. Yeah, sorry guys. Not my fault, as you can tell. It never is. But yeah, don't know how that happened. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, because if it does, then I'm going to gouge my eyes out with a spoon or something like that. But there we go. So I'll quickly add all those guys back in. You won't be able to tell the difference. But yeah, so we've got 11 people watching. Jesus Christ. Right, we'll get into this then. So the first Formula 1 World Champion on this list is Alan Jones. So he won the Formula 1 World Championship in 1980. I think he raced from 1975 until 1981, and then did one race in 1983, and did it again in he did the 1985 and 1986 seasons. He took part in the back end of 1985 for Haas Lola, and then the full 1986 season. One-time champion. He had about 10 race wins from memory, maybe slightly more than that. Was basically there for Williams' first zenith as a Formula 1 constructor. He didn't win their first race. That was Clay Regazzoni at Britain in 1979. And Regazzoni and Carlos Reutemann were the two drivers who basically started it off for Williams. But he got their first championship in 1980. And to be honest, I'd say he's slightly underrated. The way I'm describing, the way I'm deciding these are, there are some drivers, like the newer drivers, where everyone knows who they are. People like Lewis Hamilton, people like Jenson Button, people like Max Verstappen. And everyone, whether you're a fan who's been watching for 85,000 years or a fan who's picked it up from Drive to Survive. So if the opinion of the Drive to Survive fans is that X driver is overrated, then I will, or the X driver is bad when he's actually good, then I will basically base it off of that. So whichever crowd screams the loudest. So for example, when you're talking about a guy like Giuseppe Farina, who the people like Drive to Survive fans only know him as the first Formula 1 World Champion, therefore they don't really form an opinion on him. Therefore I can say, for example, he's slightly overrated or slightly underrated because the only people who know about him are the guys who have watched F1 for a long time and know the history. Whereas with Lewis Hamilton, it'd be a lot more of a nuanced opinion because there's a lot more people to take into account. Is Gilles on the tier list twice? I don't think so, because he would never. Because I put on any driver who finished second. Let me just have a look. There's Gilles once. I don't think he is, unless you're mixing him up with another driver. People always call him the forgotten world champion, but it was pretty underrated as a commentator when he filled in for ITV commentators. Yeah, I think it was when James Hunt died in '93. They basically went through a massive litany of commentators, people like Jonathan Palmer, Alan Jones, Jackie Stewart, people like that, because they just didn't know how to replace Hunt, and then Brundle came along and basically saved them. But yeah, I call Jones slightly underrated. I wouldn't call him massively underrated because it wasn't like he was a world beater, but he was on his day very good. And yeah, next up is Jim Clark. You see, this is a tough one. I'm going to put him in fairly rated to begin with, and then we'll move on, because everyone who knows Formula 1 history knows this guy is one of, if not the greatest of all time. I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I think he's second. No, actually, I think he's third behind Prost and Fangio. But it's a tough one because, again, he's fairly rated by people who know their history, but by people who, like Drive to Survive fans, for example, who will, like, whenever he comes up in a GOAT debate, people will go, well, he drove in an era where the cars weren't very good and all the drivers were really old. I mean, that was more for the 50s. So it's a tough one to really gauge. I won't ever put him in any of the overrated categories, because although there are people who say he's the greatest of all time, that's not exactly an egregious opinion. I think again he's somewhat underrated, because some fans just don't appreciate just how good he was. That's how I see it personally. I'm not sure what you guys think of that. I think he's... So what I'll do is I'll do it, because obviously already we've got two drivers in the same category. I'm going to put the guys who were more underrated closer to the left. So like as I said, so Clark is more underrated than Jones is, I think. Clark fairly rated, you think? Again, is a case of, do the old timers who know about Formula One, do they outweigh the Drive to Survive fans who don't know it? You know what? I'll put him in fairly rated. If that's what you guys think, then I'll do that. Next up that's James Hunt. It looks a bit like Ronnie Peterson, but it is James Hunt. I can know from the overalls. This is a tough one, because another one-time world champion, just like Jones was in the late 70s, early 80s, because there was a lot of them at that period of time. Is this basically every F1 driver? No, it's not. It's every world champion and every vice champion in Formula 1 history. Hunt the Shunt, yeah. The thing is, there are some people who say he was like, in his prime, Hunt was a very fast driver and a very capable driver. Newer fans don't really talk about Clark. He gets his credit as one of the greatest drivers in the 60s. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, back to Hunt. A lot of people say he was just as good as Lauda on his day. He wasn't. Just like to point out, people don't realise that in the 1976 season, until Lauda had his fiery accident, Hunt only beat him on merit on track once, and that was like halfway through the season when Lauda had his crash. Maybe slightly after, maybe like the 9th race out of 15 that Lauda had his accident, and it took like Hunt only beat him once on track. So I'm gonna put him for now in slightly overrated. Or somewhat overrated, because again, there are people who say like, oh, if he'd have continued and stuff, he would have been a multiple-time champion, and I think people look at his character and look at how he is undoubtedly the coolest Formula 1 driver of all time, and they look at his swagger, and they look at his aggression, and they look at how he drove the car, and it doesn't actually pertain to the results that he got, because he was good at Hesketh, he was very good at McLaren. But he wasn't that good when he went to Wolf and stuff, and also 6-season career. People don't realise just how short his career was. Or 7 seasons, 6 years. So I'll put him in slightly overrated. Judging by your video of best drivers each year, Prost and Schumacher are enormously overrated. I mean, if that's your opinion, that's fair enough. But I disagree with that. Next up is Mario Andretti. Another late 70s, early 80s champion. Because as I said, there was loads of them in that era. And the thing is, we're talking about Formula 1. We're not talking about IndyCar. We're not talking about NASCAR, where he's also appeared. He is a jack of all trades driver. He has been involved in all of those series. In Formula 1, aside from his championship, he wasn't that impressive. I'll just say that. He got a pole on, I think, his first start in 1968, and he won a couple more races before he got his championship winning year at Lotus. But what a lot of people don't realise about that year at Lotus was that Ronnie Peterson, his teammate, was being given subpar machinery. He was being given, for example, the race he died at in Monza, he was using an old chassis, because I'm not sure he broke his while he was in practice or something, but he was using an old chassis, and Andretti was given treatment. He was told, like Peterson was told to give up the lead, basically just sit behind Andretti for the entire races. So again, I'm going to put Andretti in slightly overrated, because there are people who act like, I mean, he's still the best American champion, and he's still one of the better drivers of his era. But I wouldn't put him on the same level as people like Lauda, people like even guys that we'll get to later, like Scheckter, Depailler, those kind of guys. Andretti was barely a full-time F1 driver. And he was in 78 and Mario was in 79, yeah. I do think Andretti was... That's the thing. He had good moments. He was very good at points, but he was overshadowed by a lot of drivers. Peterson, I mean, he came back to Ferrari in '82 and was very good. He got a pole position at Monza. He's like the 4th oldest pole sitter of all time at like 42 years old. But I'd still call him somewhat overrated. Next up is Alberto Ascari. Champion from the 50s. A lot of people like to say that he and Fangio were like ultimate rivals, but the truth is they never really had a title battle together. Like when Fangio was battling with Farina in 1950, 1951, Ascari just wasn't, LaFerrari wasn't good enough to challenge for a title. 1952, Fangio wasn't competing because he broke his neck at Monza in a pre-season testing accident, or not pre-season testing, a pre-season accident at, in, I can't remember what race it was. It was some like pre-season race though. 1953, the Ferrari was just too good for Fangio to challenge. 1954, again, Fangio's car was just too good, so the other way around. And then 1955, the Mercedes was just too good again. I don't see why the comparison comes. I mean, Fangio did once say like, "Oh, the driver I fear most is Ascari," but that's just because he was the only other decent driver from that era. That's the problem with the early 50s. Although the drivers at the top were fantastic, the drivers, the entry, the bar to enter was very low. I'm gonna call Ascari quite overrated for now. I'll put him in that tier. I would not criticise you for putting Pascal Wehrlein the best driver in 2016. Since are you all talking about my my best driver from every season video? That's great. Wehrlein is underrated though. If Hulkenberg got given a second chance, Pascal deserves an F1 seat nowadays. Yep. He raced 13 to 14 years, and I forgot all of the top of my head, but rarely do full seasons. Yeah. Yeah, he did race 13 to 14 years. Andretti did. He raced from 1968 until 1982, but that was intermittently. That was he raced. He didn't race full time until 1975 when he was with Val Parnelli's team. And he only went full-time until 1980, and then he came back for a couple of races in 1982. No, actually, he did 1981 as well for Alfa Romeo, but I'm going to call Ascari quite overrated, because people act like he was just as good as Fangio when he wasn't, and he just didn't have enough. He didn't have enough to really get going. Next up is Jack Brabham, 3-time champion in the 1950s and 60s, spanning his time in the sport. He went from 1955 until 1970, but he didn't really come to fruition until 1959. He was quite strange in the fact that, I mean, back in the day, it wasn't so heinous to only come into your own at like 33, 34, which is when he won his first title. And he retired at like 45, which even, because obviously Fangio retired at 47, sorry. So it wasn't too far removed from that, but Brabham was very old for his era. He's one of the oldest pole sitters in F1 history. I think he's like second on the list behind Farina, for the oldest pole sitter, or maybe even Fangio for the oldest pole sitter. But he has 3 championships. But I think in my video I only gave him one of them, because I think he is overrated. He was worse than Denny Hulme when they were racing together. He was not that much better than Bruce McLaren in his prime. I mean, Bruce McLaren was a good driver, but yeah, he wasn't really better. And then when he started Brabham, he got beaten by Dan Gurney, who didn't win a championship. And I know Dan Gurney is, for me, the best driver who didn't win a championship, but still. I think Brabham is quite overrated. I don't think he's in the extremely overrated tier. I don't know if anyone's going to actually go into that tier. But for now, he's extremely overrated because I don't see why people rate him highly. I can just see the chat isn't updating anymore. I will just quickly back off and then go back on. I can't see. What was that? Oh, okay, so people are still putting in the chat. I was confused then because I couldn't see my I couldn't see my stream anymore because I was confused. Oh well. I'll get back on the case. So Brabham created his own team just to get beaten by his teammate. Yes. So yeah, if I go and look at the standings, I'm not sure if you guys can see when I go onto these other tabs. Oh, you can see it. Perfect. 1962 Formula One World Championship. That'll do for now. So Brabham had what's his face? Where is he? Because it was 1962 was the first year the team was around. Where are they? Oh, hold on, let me just see. Did Brabham only have? Oh, they only competed towards the end of the year, and I assume it was just Brabham. Okay, 1963. 1963 was this the year where they started having Brabham Racing Organisation. You had Jack Brabham and Dan Gurney. So yep. So let's have a look who was ahead in the standings. Gurney was ahead in the standings. I know you can talk about retirements, but this era was quite temperamental for that. 1964. Who was ahead in the standings? It was Gurney. I'm pretty sure he was still with the team. Yes. 1965. I think, ironically, Gurney left just before the team got really good because he went off to do his own thing with Eagle, his own team. And yeah, so he lost to Gurney 3 years in a row. From what I remember, he only beat Hulme because Hulme had more reliability retirements in 1966. If I just quickly move over to here, yeah. Jack Brabham and Denny Hulme. Let's have a look. So Brabham, yeah, look at that. Everyone else behind him has just got a smattering of retirements, whereas he has 3. Hulme has 5. You could argue that, yes, he's got a 4-win streak, but yeah, essentially, in my opinion, the way that Brabham lost to all of his, the guys like Dan Gurney, it doesn't really sit well with me. So Brabham created his own team to get a bit like this. Yeah, he did. He created his own team to win with it. How about that? He also is one of 2 drivers to win in 3 different decades, to be fair. Yeah, that's longevity he's good for, especially for that era where it would be completely fine for a driver to only do a career for 5 to 8 seasons. I suppose you could argue that. Maybe I'll put him ahead of Ascari, but I still think he's really overrated because he's not a 3 championship caliber driver for me. He was good at Cooper in 1959 and 60, but it was just because no one else really had enough good machinery. Like people like Sterling Moss, people like Tony Brooks, people like but it was also a transitional phase because it was going from the guys like Fangio, Musso, Collins, Hawthorne to the new guard like Moss, Brooks, Phil Hill, Jim Clark, Graham Hill. It was in the transitional phase, so I think he claimed those just because he was in the transitional phase. Probably not everyone knows the fact that Jack Brabham was trying out all the new developments of the car. Gurney drove the proving cars. Okay, maybe I'll put him in somewhat overrated then because he's like Hamilton and Russell in 2022, except more severe, I suppose. Next up is Jenson Button. Here's a driver who I think is underrated, quite underrated in fact, because he starts in 2000. He's against Ralf Schumacher. I don't remember him getting absolutely thrashed by Schumacher as teammates. Moves to Renault, or Benetton, then they changed to being Renault. And they are... and he was partnered with Fisichella 1 year, and then I think Trulli by the next year. And he wasn't much worse than either of them. Then he goes to BAR, beats Jacques Villeneuve, beats Takuma Sato. They change to Honda, or they stay as... he thrashes Sato 2 years in a row. Beats Barrichello as a teammate when they're both together at Honda. And that's pretty much all 3 years apart from 2008 where Barrichello did that one good drive at Silverstone. Beats him in 2009, although his end of year was awful. He was pretty much equal to Lewis Hamilton in 2010, thrashed him in 2011. 2012 he got thrashed, to be honest, but yeah. Beat Perez in 2013, beat Magnussen in 2014. Was it 2015 he lost to Alonso, or was it 2016? He beat Alonso one of the years and lost to him the other, and then came back for that one-off appearance. I think he's really underrated. The calibre of teammates he's gone up against and done well against, I think he's quite underrated. Jenson is overrated because his 2000 to 2002 was so embarrassingly shit. I disagree because 2000 to 2002, that's literally like that's a sixth of his career. Probably even less than that. And then you look at... He's admitted he had to learn from Fisichella and Trulli to get good. Still, he's a young driver. Those guys had a bit of experience. Jenson Button is most people rate Jenson now. I don't think they do. I think most people see him as the guy that beat Lewis once, especially not historians and people like that, people who actually know this stuff, but most like normal fans, most like Drive to Survive and similar types see him as just the pundit, the guy who looks at Danica Patrick wrong whenever she says something that he doesn't like. Button is underrated. He is by far not the best one-time champ, but Hamilton fans love to discredit Button for what he did against Lewis. Exactly. I agree with that. He almost got a podium in 02. Yeah, those Renaults and Vettels he was driving were pretty awful. I'll put him in somewhat underrated for now, because I do think if you guys seem to think he's a bit more or less rated, then I'll do that. Fair enough. Next up, is this... unfortunately, he's been cropped up, but I think that's Damon Hill. Because I recognise that Rothman suit and I recognise that clean-shaven look. He's overrated. He is so overrated. I don't know how this man is considered like people look at him 1996 Formula 1 world champion. He is undoubtedly one of the worst champions in my opinion. Doesn't even hold. I also don't know who it was better driver against Hamilton. Is it Rosberg or Button? Button, because Rosberg only beat Hamilton once, and he only did it because of Lewis being crap. Whereas Jenson beat prime Lewis, arguably, or a very good Lewis, better than 2014 to 2016 Lewis, and was much more consistent against him. He beat Alonso as well, or got deleted in their plane accident later, I suppose. Okay, yeah. I think Damon Hill is massively overrated. He goes into Brabham in 1992, and he just drives around from the back. There's not really much he can do. He loses to Alain Prost in 1993. Bear in mind that Prost did not like that Williams. He won a championship, but he didn't like the car because it was active, and he was used to passive cars, and his smooth style did not work with it. And yet Hill still lost to him by a country mile, and Prost made multiple mistakes like Monaco, where he got a 10-second drive through 10-second stop-go penalty for some infringement that he did. Places like that, Prost had loads more problems. I mean, Hill did retire from the lead a couple of times, but Prost in general just didn't like. You should be beating a 40-year-old Alain Prost. 1994 gets drop kicked by Senna in the first couple of races. Before he dies. And then when David Coulthard and Nigel Mansell come in, he wasn't much better than either of them. And like the last round in Adelaide, Damon Hill is fighting for a title. He has to clutch up and do well in the last race of the season, and he gets beaten by Mansell in qualifying by more than half a second. And yes, they both managed to overtake him right at the start, but I think that Mansell said he wanted to stay out of the title battle. Like Hill had the best car for the entire season, I don't care what anyone says, and much better from Monaco onwards. And Schumacher got banned from or disqualified from 4 races, and Hill still lost. And he's like, oh, he turned in on me in Adelaide. Yeah, that's what you do when someone sends a stupid dive run from 8 million years back and expects you to give up the position. Schumacher was right to turn in that Adelaide accident. At least Damon Hill has gone up against pretty good against teammates throughout his career. He hasn't though. Lost to Prost, lost to Senna, was pretty equal to Coulthard. I'd argue lost to Mansell in 1994. I always maintain that if Nigel Mansell took over from Senna after he died and didn't do any of his kart commitments or American commitments, he would have won the title. 1995, he was awful, Hill was, against Schumacher. Again, the Williams was a better car, yet he lost the title by about 30 points. It took for him to go up against the rookie Jacques Villeneuve, and still, then he only beat him by he only was about 5 points ahead of him in terms of, like, accounting for retirements that weren't the other driver's fault and stuff like that. Goes against Pedro Diniz in 97. He's decent. I mean, Diniz, Damon Hill's individual performances. Like, he has like two of his races, Suzuka 1994 and Hungary 1997, are two of the top 20 performances in F1 history for me. But when it comes to other stuff like Spa 1998, he's 3.5 seconds a lap slower than Ralf Schumacher in the wet, and they team orders it so that he wins. 1999, Heinz-Harald Frentzen is an outside shot for the championship, and Hill doesn't even get a single podium. Like, considering how late he started his career and the sheer look of him ending up in that seat, he both is over and underrated, because if circumstances had been different, he would have never become a champion. Yeah, you see, people say like, oh, for his circumstances, he did well. Coming into Formula 1 at 32, starting a career in car racing at 24, he did well. But I don't judge it based on that. I judge it based on your actual Formula 1 career. Like, I don't care if you caught herpes as a child or if you got run over by a tarantula. Like, it doesn't pertain to your Formula One career. You can't quantify those things. I judge it on the things you can quantify on. And for me, Damon Hill is massively overrated. Like, he is not championship caliber. Like, we look at my video on who was the best driver in every season. He was nowhere near the title in any of the seasons because he made so many mistakes. Adelaide was more on Schumacher, but I'd say Racing Instant. I disagree. I believe it was more on Hill because Schumacher, yes, he was damaged, and yes, I don't even think he looked in his mirrors because he didn't expect Hill to send it back from. No, actually, no, he did look in his mirrors, but he looked on the left-hand side because he saw Hill was there. He didn't expect Hill to send such a ludicrous dive bomb. I think that was a massive dive bomb from Hill. He should have just waited if he knew that Schumacher was damaged, or if he knew that he was ailing from recovering from an accident. He should have found a better corner. There was a hairpin further down the track where you can go for an easy move. Hill was 30 seconds ahead until the safety car. I'm not exactly sure where. But I know. I remember looking at the Atlas F1. I can actually get this up now. Atlas F1 1998, because Atlas, the predecessor to Autosport, I think it was. They have detailed like lap by lap charts, which is very alien for this time. 1998 Spa. Here we go. So Villeneuve leads the first lap, but we'll have a look at guys like Hill. Where is Hill? Hill is there. Ralf Schumacher. Again, Ralf was starting in the back of the pack, I think. Where is Ralf? RSC, where is he? Am I blind? I can't see him. I genuinely can't see Ralf Schumacher. Where is he? I'm not sure if you guys can also see this table. Where is he? I genuinely can't see him. Hold on, have I got the right year? Oh, I've got 1996. That's why I can't see him. Sorry, guys. Belgium, here we go. I was wondering what happened then. So, Hill's first after the first lap. Ralf is 7th. Ralf stays in 7th, but the thing is, I think Ralf is stuck behind someone at this point. Actually, he wasn't. However, so he gets past Irvine, and then he drops it. Okay, he drops to 45 seconds behind. There must have been some sort of thing. You don't drop 9 seconds in one. I don't know what's happening to him. If you look in this middle point of the race, he's just falling. He's just falling back, and I don't know why. Like losing 20 seconds in one lap. Did he try and go onto another set of tyres or something? He may have done, because look, right, as soon as right in the middle part of this race, about lap 15, he goes 1 minute 12.6, 1 minute 10.8, 1 minute. Where is he now? Because I assume he does an overtake. 1 minute 2.1. 44. Like, he's gaining so much per lap. The main reason I respect Villeneuve but hate Hill is that Hill wasn't ever willing to take the same kind of risks as Jack and push a damaged car to the finish. That's what cost him a 1994 title. Correct. Nigel Mansell is a good driver, but I don't see him how Ciaron Smith views him. He's the best driver on Senna, Prost, and Nelson Piquet Sr. That doesn't make sense to me. Again, people like to look at. I will get to him later on. But people like to look at Mansell with rose-tinted glasses because, again, he was like a hunt. He endeared himself to the fans. He was aggressive. On his day, he was the fastest out of those lot. But when he wasn't on his day, he wasn't very fast at all. Back to Damon Hill. I think he's extremely overrated. You guys clearly don't. I'll put him in quite overrated maybe then. Next up is Emerson Fittipaldi. Again, I like Jack Brabham. I don't see how he won 2 titles. I mean, obviously 2 titles instead of 3. But I don't see how he won 2 titles. Obviously he was in the dominant Lotus in 1972, and you could argue just the right cars at the right time. But he was worse than Ronnie Peterson when they were teammates. He was worse than Jochen Rindt. I mean, obviously Rindt died, and then he got the seat. They weren't really teammates as such, but they were drivers in the same team in the same year because Fittipaldi took over after he died. He was worse than Ronnie Peterson in 1973 and 74, sorry. In 74, he had Jochen Mass as a teammate, I'm pretty sure. And Jochen Mass, I mean, really not that great a driver. I'm pretty sure, like, there was a stat where when Fittipaldi qualified, you know, for the race that Jochen Mass won at Monk Week in 1975, while guys like Niki Lauda and stuff were qualifying in first, Jochen Mass qualified 12th for that race that he won. But yeah, going back to Fittipaldi, I mean, also the fact that he went to Copa Sucar in 1976 and basically cut his career short after about 5 seasons doesn't really help him out. Fittipaldi was at least championship winning level. He was championship winning level. I'll give him that. He just, I mean, in my video, he didn't get any championships. The best driver every year, but that doesn't necessarily mean he was not a championship level. It just means that he got, like, he was in the wrong, like, era because people like Peterson were around, Stewart were around, guys like that were around, and they were winning as well. He wasn't necessarily not championship level. He was just not on the same level as other guys. While someone that worships Schumacher thinks Hill is overrated, but it does mean Prost is overrated because Hill gave him a tough time. I mean, I'm not sure who we're talking about here about worshipping Schumacher, but I don't worship Schumacher. I'm not sure if he's talking about Ciaron or whatever, because I can see people are talking about him in the comments. But does it mean Prost is overrated because Hill gave him a tough time in 1993? He didn't give him a tough time in 1993. I have a statistics sheet, and this is going to sound very nerdy and very... hello, my name is Peter, and I've just used Peter as a random example, not realizing that's the name of one of my podcast hosts, but you get what I mean. My name's Kevin, and I'm here to give you a spreadsheet onto why this is the case, or why this is the case. Let me have a look at who are we talking about? We're talking about Alan Prost. 1993 against Damon Hill. I have a sheet. You can see the red markers are where they had caveats, things that weren't either of a driver's fault. Basically screwing them out of good results. And across the season, admittedly, they only finished without caveats how many times? So that is South Africa, Brazil, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, there is a good statistical pool. But in qualifying, bear in mind, Prost was not a qualifying driver. He beat him by half a second in qualifying and half a minute in the races on average. Like, especially at the end of the season, Prost was by far the better driver. And bear in mind, this is a 40-year-old Prost who was clearly past his prime. Nowhere near the level that he was in the 80s. You're not as bad as Football Tacticos. You're good. I don't know who that is, but I'll take it as a compliment. So, yeah, we were on Emerson Fittipaldi. Yeah, we're going back and forth between drivers, so people watching this back are being like, what on earth is he going on about? But Emerson, I think he's overrated. I think he's quite overrated. He's in the same tier as... Oh, not this again. What? Why has it just gone white screen? Oh my god. What is going on? I've been flashbanged by the enemy. Oh, for goodness. Right, so brilliant. I've got to upload the files again and do it again. Brilliant. Technical difficulties again, guys. Tier list. I'll maybe close some of these tabs because I assume that's what it's doing. My laptop is just screwing itself over because of it. And then I get those other 2 files because the way I saved them was a bit silly. There we go. Frentzen and McLaren. Hill's AI is quite fast in Grand Prix 3. Button is not underrated because people forget his 2000, especially 2001 too. Yeah, Silverstone Hockenheim, where he beat Prost. I mean, Silverstone, let's have a look. So Silverstone, Prost didn't finish. Again, we can have a look at the gaps and stuff like that, but that's 2 races. Donington, Brazil, Hungary, Spa. Donington doesn't count because both of the Williams were aquaplaning because the active suspension was causing the cars to bottom out because they didn't know how to handle wet weather conditions. Brazil, I don't think either. Prost didn't finish. Hungary, Prost didn't finish. Spa, there was some, again, that is a caveat. That means there was some sort of caveat. I'll have to go and have a look and see what that was. Let me just quickly remove some of these because otherwise it will just blow up again. If I go like that. that should be all right. So 1993 Belgium. There will be some reason why I've given that caveat. I only give caveats to things that were outside of a driver's control. So if you spin out, you lose the 10 seconds or whatever it is to your teammate. 1993 Belgian Grand Prix. Let me just Control F, search for the name Prost. With Prost leading from Hill, so then overtook Prost. Prost had a slow second stop, which allowed Hill to take the lead. Schumacher then overtook Prost to claim second. Plus, yeah, so he had a slow stop. That's why he was that far behind. Sadly, Silverstone are tearing up Bridge Corner to build a go-kart track where it is. That's a real shame. I don't know why they're doing that. But yeah, back to the list. So, I think... Oh, hold on. Let me just... Why can't I see the actual list? Why I can only see the images? Oh, for goodness sake. I actually hate... Hold on. Give me a second. I actually want to put my head through... I want to be like that Ferrari mechanic at Brazil 2008 who put his head into the wall at times. So put these images back in. You guys are going to be like, this guy is so... unorganized, but I promise you I'm not. Let me go. Save. There we go. There we go. So who did we have? We had why is it not come up again? Oh, for goodness. So we've got... So it's not coming up there with a tier list view. Surely it'll come up now. Why is it not coming up with the actual tier list? Like, it's not coming up with the template of the tier list. Oh, for goodness sake. There it is. Create this tier list. And it just disappears. What on earth? Oh, for goodness sake. Oh, so that was the original tier list. I made my own. Let me see if I can... Oh, this is so rubbish. Give me a second. I'm going to reload the entire tier maker website. Or should I go back on my search history? That's a brave thing to do on Livestream. Where is it? That's not it. Oh yeah, because I was making a thumbnail, so I searched Max Verstappen up. So it's just being extremely annoying. Right, tier maker, and I don't want it to default to that link. Right, tier maker. You know what? I'll just find an F1 Champions, Formula 1 Champions. There we go. I'll just find a Formula 1 Champions tier list. That's yeah, that's UEFA Champions League champions, mate. Where are we looking for? World Chess Champ? Really? Well, this one's Pilotos Campeonatos. I'm assuming. Yeah. So I mean, it's in a completely different language. However, what I can do is choose files, and then put all of my files in. I'm just gonna literally, when I put this in the actual video, I'll just delete all of this bollocks. Me trying to sort out this. Right, there we go. There's France and McLaren. I'll put these tiers back in. Extremely overrated. Quite overrated. Slightly, or so I put it as somewhat, but I always kept saying slightly, so I'm gonna put it as slightly overrated. Oh, and that's not. Oh, that's decided to default over to the left hand side. I don't care at this point. Fairly rated. Slightly underrated. Whoever reckons Lewis could underperform and get beaten by Leclerc this year, I agree. I believe he will. Lewis doesn't have a good record against teammates who are who have worse kind of stats than him, and that's why I don't ever look at the stats and stuff like that, because it's just a bunch of uncontextualized bollocks. To be frankly honest, people who say, "Oh, Lewis Hamilton has the most wins of all time," not realizing that Lewis Hamilton also has 6 times the amount of starts as people like Fangio and co. Quite overrated. Not quite overrated. Quite underrated. Sorry. My arm is aching because I'm having to type at the most weird angle. Quite underrated and extremely underrated. So I'll put all of these guys back in here. Hold on, that's blue passports. Oh, they've all jogged around again. So James Hunt, we put him in slightly overrated. Where's Alan Jones? We put him in slightly underrated. Where's Emerson Fittipaldi? We put him in quite overrated. Ascari was quite overrated. Jack Brabham was quite overrated. Switch those two around. Do you think Lawson will be the next Gasly? I don't know, because he's got to be better than Perez. There's no way he's not better than Perez. But no one in that Red Bull is going to do well. No one in that Red Bull is going to do better than Verstappen or even get close to him. We put Andretti in the slightly overrated. We put who else did we have? We'll get to them when we get to them. Next up is Farina, Giuseppe Farina. Oh yeah, I mean, I've just dropped my phone in quite epic style. We'll just get to them when we get to them because I can't be bothered to go and find them all. I personally think Hamilton 7 is a tad savage, but whatever. I mean, he's lower than that on my list now, but we'll get to that in a minute. Giuseppe Farina, I'd put him as slightly overrated, just because, like, people seem to think he beat Fangio on pure merit in 1950 when he didn't. He didn't. I think Fangio had 3 mechanical retirements to Farina's 2. And in the 6-race season or whatever, how it was 6 rounds of the Formula 1 World Championship, it basically stiffed him. Farina, other than that, was nothing special. A couple of wins here and there. Had a couple of good races. 1953 Germany, but overall I think he's slightly overrated. Denny Hulme, I think he's slightly underrated, just because, I mean, for a guy with 1 championship, 1 pole position in his entire career, and only about 10 wins, he was very good. As I said, he beat Jack Brabham in the seasons they were teammates, especially in 1967 when he won his title. Went to McLaren with Bruce McLaren. I'm pretty sure, aside from, McLaren was good in 68 and 69, but when McLaren died, Hulme basically became the team leader at McLaren. The only thing people give credit for is him winning the first ever championship. That's all he's known for, yeah. Hulme, I think, is slightly underrated because, again, his stats don't tell the full story. He was very good, and not. I don't think generational world beating, not on the same level as Rindt, as Stewart, as even Fittipaldi, but he's still very good. Jackie Stewart, I'd say, is fairly rated, because everyone knows who he is. And even with the newer fans, they seem to respect him because of his driver safety stuff. Even if it's for the wrong reasons, he's rated quite highly amongst them. Farina had solid longevity for a 50s driver. I disagree. I mean, obviously, he had the pre-war Grand Prix. He was in those. But he only did 6 seasons. The same as Ascari. The same as other guys like that. Fangio had more than him. Farina punted a lap driver into a crowd of spectators in 1930. Yeah, he did that a couple of times. He did that to Marcel Leyu in the 1936 Deauville Grand Prix, and he did it to someone else. It was some like Laszlo Hartmann. That's it, in another race in 1938 for some reason, and he killed both of them. And then in 1953 he crashed into a crowd of spectators at Argentina and killed 15 people. I think it was. He was a very reckless driver for that era. Like, you'd think that they would decide to back off for their safety, but they decided not. He decided not to. Then Jochen Rindt. quite underrated in my opinion. Again, because he's a one-time champion who, I mean, he never got to realise his full potential. I think he would have become a multiple-time champion. He would have easily beaten Fittipaldi had he lived. And, I mean, he could have... I mean, he was only, what? I think he was like 30, 28, 30 when he died. So he could have easily gone until the late 70s and got the championships that Andretti eventually ended up getting. But he could have also left Lotus because he didn't like Colin Chapman that much. Could have gone to Ferrari, could have gone to McLaren, could have gone to all the other teams. Sergio Ricky Stewart is so good. Is so good. Spain, 66, 68 Germany, still the oldest living champion too. Yeah. I think Stewart is a driver who got most close to perfection in F1 history. He had no weakness. I disagree. Fangio, for me, had no weakness. Prost, for me, apart from a bit of bad sportsmanship, was pretty flawless. On the terms of actual driving performances, I think Stewart... Yeah, don't get me wrong, Stewart's up there, but he's not the most flawless driver in history. Yeah, Rins for me is quite underrated. Not extremely underrated, because that's like literally like reserved for we'll get to the special drivers in the point. Niki Lauda, I also think is slightly underrated. Because the guys who know him, and they say, yep, he was the best driver of the 1970s and one of the best drivers in the early 80s. But those who know him from Rush, those who know him as the guy who brought Lewis Hamilton to Mercedes, who was also a champion in the 70s, I think people don't realise just how good he was. He's 5th on my all-time list of drivers because he was just a human calculator, and he deserved, I think in my every best driver from every season video, he got 5 championships. Like, I think he got 1975, 1976, 77, and 1974 and 1984. Is Watson on this tier list? I don't think so. No, in fact he will be, because he was second in 1982. He should be on this list anyway. If not, then that's unfortunate. I never understood why Jackie abandoned his own team in the late 90s, because I reckon 1992 it could have been a title contender. Because he sold up to Ford. That's why. He didn't abandon it, he just sold up to Ford. I don't know why they didn't just keep it as it was, to be fair, because Ford basically ruined it. Jochen Rindt is only talked about for winning a championship after dying. One talks about any of his other achievements underrated. Yeah, that's why I put him in quite underrated. Niki Lauda for me is slightly underrated. Jody Scheckter is also slightly underrated. In fact, I'd put him in quite underrated. Not as underrated as Rindt, but Scheckter, he went up against guys like Patrick Depailler, Gilles Villeneuve, who people seem to think is a god amongst men for some reason. He went up against, Fittipaldi. He was, like, in his first races in 1973. I don't know why I just said it like that, but in 1973, like, his first race, I think it was in France, he was fighting Fittipaldi for the lead when he crashed into him. Like, don't get me wrong, he was crash prone, but he was very fast in his early days, and then basically edged out the crash proneness. Maybe Niki could be quite underrated given his legacy and the competition he had. You know what? Yeah, I'll do that as well. I think he's still less underrated than Scheckter is. I'm not saying Schecter's like a multiple-time generational god, but he's better than one championship in my opinion. Even though, like, I mean, I can't really pick which season he should have won, because like his seasons at Tyrrell, he wasn't better than the likes of Lauda. But had he carried on, had Lauda carried on, or sorry, had Scheckter carried on rather than just leaving after 1980, I think he could have won a couple more races. Next up is Nelson Piquet, right? Also, people saying Lauda is fairly rated to be. Again, people who know him, Lauda is fairly rated. But people who don't know him, he seems to be. I'll put him back in slightly underrated. I think I don't like putting him in there. Nelson Piquet is a tough one, because you can't talk about Nelson Piquet without talking about his off-track stuff. And I don't like to talk about people's off-track stuff, but it happens. He has said some stuff that he shouldn't have said, and he's done some stuff that he shouldn't have done. Like, regardless of whether you think his stuff about Lewis was unfair, saying that the reason why he was better than Senna was because he's alive was undoubtedly unfair. You don't call your teammate's wife an ugly blockhead like he did to Nigel Mansell. He was still a very good driver though, and for that reason, I think I've got to put him in slightly underrated. Because again, Drive to Survive fans will just see him as this salty old man, and people from back in the day will see him as slightly worse than Prost and Senna. But I think for that reason, he's slightly underrated. I put Nelson in slightly underrated just because, I mean, again, if am I saying this because of what you said off track? I don't think so. I think I'm fairly respectful. But based purely on track performance, Nelson is underrated given he's a three-time champion against some insane competition. Yeah. I mean, 1981, he didn't really have much competition because the only fast cars that year were his car and the Renault and the Williams. I mean, Carlos Reutemann should have won that title because of the Spanish Grand Prix that got demoted to a non-championship race when it shouldn't have been. 1983, I mean, he had no... I mean, Alain Prost... I mean, he beat Prost on pure merit, actually, in 83, so I'll give him that. And then in 1987, he beat Mansell, despite having lost 90% of his depth perception because of the crash at Imola. So, yeah, he is slightly underrated, I'd say. Until his accident, Piquet cooked Hall of Fame. He is a Hall of Fame driver, no doubt. Fangio, I think is the greatest of all time. So this is going to be biased, but I think he's also in the slightly underrated tier because people who put him as the GOAT will know how good he is, but people who know their stuff might put people like Clark above him, or people like Hamilton, Schumacher, Prost, Senna, all those guys above him. And the people who don't know, Drive to Survive fans just see him as the guy in the 50s, and they use him as an example of all of the guys in the 50s were old and they were just rich, and he was neither of those things. I mean, he was old, but not everyone in the 50s was old, and he wasn't rich. I'm pretty sure he was from a working class family. He won 2 of his 3 titles by 1 point as well. PK, that is, I assume. Fangio for me is very underrated. Basically, if you wanted to win a championship in the 1950s, you signed Juan Manuel Fangio. Even when he retired in 1958, he was 47 years old, and he got pole position in his home race in Buenos Aires, and it was like he'd never left because people seem to think he retired after Germany in 1957. He didn't. He did a few races in 1958 and was still very good. I put him slightly underrated. Next up is Keke Rosberg. You want to talk about a driver who is so criminally underrated? Wasn't Fangio a bus driver? It wouldn't put it past. I wouldn't put it. He might have done something in the war, something to that regard in the war. He also did Turismo Carretera and like lots of endurance point-to-point races. There's a Keke Rosberg reference in Angry Birds. That's quite funny. But for me, Keke Rosberg, I think it's fair to put him in the extremely underrated tier because this guy, yes, he had a very short career, and that's the only thing you can really hold against him. But he beat Emerson Fittipaldi when he was teammates with him at Fittipaldi. He was better than Carlos Reutemann when they were in the first couple of races in 1982. He beat Jacques Laffite, who admittedly not the best of drivers, but definitely a good race winner, a potential championship caliber driver. Was just as good as, if not slightly better than Nigel Mansell when they were teammates in 1985, including that amazing pole lap in 1985 at Silverstone, where he beat Nigel Mansell by over a second on his home stomping grounds. He was unfairly kind of represented in 1986 because of his reliability against Prost, and yeah, I would say Fangio is the GOAT. I know, either him or Schumacher. I would say Jim Clark is extremely underrated at the time. He was dominating F1 in the era. He's very, very dangerous. We'll get to him later, but for me, Rosberg is extremely underrated because I think he was just as fast as any of the drivers from his era. Piquet, Lauda, Watson, Jones, those guys. I think he was just as quick as any of them. The only thing he lacked in was a bit of conservation because he basically drove the car as fast as he could 100% of the time. But yeah, I put him in extremely underrated. Next up is Alain Prost. I'd put him in slightly underrated. Oh, not again! Oh, for goodness sake. Why is it taking me to all these websites? Oh, for goodness sake, man. I'm actually fuming because this is extremely annoying. We'll try it again. I can get my task manager up. I don't think my laptop is essentially dying. Oh, it is. It's using 100% of its CPU because of Streamlabs. That's why it's happening. It's using 50% of its CPU, 60%, 70%. It's using quite a lot of its CPU to I'm gonna try and get rid of these ads that you can't see on the side, just so it happens a bit easier. There we go. Right, so we're gonna. You see, this is the confusing thing. It's gotten rid of the actual tier list again, which I don't understand why it's done it. Because look, it's gotten rid of the actual like list. Formula 1 World Champions, right? Do I just do it as Formula 1 Champions? Because I can't be able to keep going through and having to keep refresh it and stuff. I think I'm just gonna do Formula 1 World Champions for now, and I might eventually end up going to the drivers that I added in the Vice Champions. So extremely overrated. Quite overrated. Slightly. Yeah, I'll just do champions. Unfortunately, I wanted to do guys like, because Gilles Villeneuve and people like that I have strong opinions on. But I think I'm going to have to just do it, because if we don't, I'm going to be here for ages. I'm going to be here for ages, and I don't want to be. And I love all you guys. It's very frustrating having to redo all of this every single time. I'll make sure next time, maybe I'll do it in the university recording studios, because they have better laptops that don't glitch out every 5 seconds. Fairly rated. Slightly underrated. Slightly, no, not slightly, quite underrated. And then add another tier. Yeah, I will just say, by the way, there is a lot of ads popping up on this screen, so that doesn't help. If I had an ad blocker, I suppose, but I don't have an ad. I don't know of a good ad blocker, so there we go. So we've got 2019 Williams infrastructure, essentially, yes. I'll quickly go through the guys what we've already painstakingly done. Slightly overrated for Farina. Holm, slightly underrated. Jackie Stewart, fairly rated. Jochen Rindt, quite underrated. Emerson Fittipaldi, quite overrated. Niki Lauda, slightly underrated, more so than Holm. Hunt, slightly overrated. Mario Andretti, slightly overrated. Jody Scheckter, quite underrated, more so than Rindt. Use Brave as your browser. I've never heard of Brave. Thank you for that. I'll look at that after this stream. Hopefully it won't do it again before the end of the stream. Jones is slightly underrated. PK we decided was slightly underrated. Did we? I'm pretty sure we did. Fangio was slightly underrated. We're just giving every driver a slightly underrated status. Rosberg, extremely underrated. We gave Damon Hill the extremely overrated treatment. Where is he? Go in that line, you bitch. Don't know why I just said that, but oh well. Ascari, quite overrated. Which other guys have we missed? Brabham, quite overrated. Yeah, I'll use Brave as my search engine from now on if it doesn't use adverts, because it's annoying me otherwise. We said Jim Clark. No, I don't think we did do Jim Clark. So yeah, Alan Prost. I think he's also slightly overrated. Just because. Sorry, slightly underrated. If I said overrated, I meant slightly underrated. Just because, again, Senna fans, they're just unbearable. I was in an argument with someone on Instagram earlier on because they were like, oh, Prost was a coward and slow. Like, no, he wasn't. Like, if anyone who beats Senna in points 2 years in a row isn't slow, and they also said he got political, not realising that Senna also got political when he vetoed Derek Warwick's signing because he was scared that he'd beat him. And people say, oh, it's because of budgets, or it was because of he didn't want a British driver in a British team. Well, Senna was good. Nigel Mansell was a British driver in a British team at Lotus against Elio De Angelis, and he got unfairly treated by Peter War. So it's not that's just bollocks. Prost is better than Senna. Yeah, Prost is better than Senna. As a French, Prost is better than Senna. Yeah, Prost is slightly underrated. 1982 champion, but without what he did for Prost he was also admirable. Yeah, so we all agree that Prost is slightly underrated. Senna, I'm going to put slightly overrated. Not extremely overrated. He's not. Although yes, he wasn't as good as Prost. He wasn't awful. He wasn't awful. On his day, he was undoubtedly the fastest driver on the grid. But there are some people who glaze him so much. Oh yeah, we did do Jensen as well. Yeah, we said he was quite underrated. Did we say he was quite underrated or slightly? I think we said slightly. There are so many people who glaze Ayrton Senna so much. Like he had great moments. Portugal 1985, Brazil 1991. Like those moments where he transcends ability. But then you get people say, like, Donington 1993, the first lap was great, but the rest of it, winning by a minute and stuff, means nothing because Prost and Hill did 6 stops because they were trying to sort out their suspension. Wouldn't Prost have 10 World Championships under the current point system? It's 8, I think, or 7 like that, but it's not 10, but it's something. Because I gave him, I think, in my system where we reward drivers for being the best driver in every season, I gave him 7 titles. He was the best driver in 1982 and 1985 through to 1990. Yo says Vord Palavil. Yes. Some people glaze Senna as much as Ciaron glazes Kimi. See, Ciaron, he glazes Kimi, but it's his character. There are some people who just don't look at the facts. Because I know Ciaron bases his entire opinions on facts and on very detailed analysis. And although I don't agree with him on everything, and although I believe that he's a bit crazy sometimes, at least I know that what he's saying is based in facts and based in reality. But Senna fans, they just glaze him. They're he just baffles me. Like, he would have won 1994 had he not died. But he was only the best driver, in my opinion, in 2 seasons. And that was 1991 and 1993. Nonsense commentators, pundits and former drivers always thought Senna was #1 driver even back then. Okay, so pundits always know the best. Okay, so let's listen to Paul di Resta and act like he's the goat of all beings. I disagree. The reason why people seem to think he was the best, it's because of aura. I hate using that word, but it's aura. It's because everyone, like, Prost didn't have the same aura as Senna because he just drove. He didn't have to force people off the track to win. Apart from Suzuka 1989, he didn't have to do what Senna did to Schumacher, and I think it was Spa 92, or there was one race where he spun Schumacher out when he was at Benetton for no reason. He was just so aggressive, and that's why people seem to think he was this overwhelming being, because he did have these transcending moments, and Prost had less of those, but he was, because Prost's overall average of results was better, so he didn't have as much of those transcendental moments. The average here must start with 1 because Senna was seen as a hero in Brazil and Japan well before his death. And that's the thing. Senna, when you look at his teammates that he went up against compared to, like, Prost went up against John Watson in his rookie season and beat him. He went up against he went up against René Arnoux, not a world champion caliber driver, but still a fantastic guy who got 21 pole positions in his career. He was very good. He went up against Niki Lauda, who, even in 1984, was still a fantastically good driver and learned a lot from Lauda, I think. He went up against, who was he? Rosberg. People like that. Like Keke Rosberg, Ayrton Senna, John Alesi, and Nigel Mansell. These are the guys that Prost went up against. Damon Hill. Like, all champions, race winners, or very good drivers. I mean, the only one that you can argue of Prost's teammates who was stinky was Stefan Johansson. Maybe. I mean, obviously Johansson was. I mean, I'd argue Johansson was even was not world championship level, but he was a race winning level driver. Whereas Senna went up against Johnny Cecotto. Again, Stefan Johansson again. Michele Alboreto. I think Alboreto did one. No, he didn't do a substitute race with Tolman in '84. What am I on about? De Angelis. Okay, De Angelis was very good, but it was also being Senna was also being favoured. Johnny Dumfries, Satoru Nakajima, Prost, and then guys like Gerhard Berger, who was a number 2 driver, Michael Andretti, who although underrated was not up to caliber. Damon Hill, like really. People remember things that way because Senna had a natural charisma and knew how to use the media. Despite Prost's penchant for politics, he lacked that media presence outside of France. That is perfect. That is a perfect way to say it. The impact Ayrton Senna brought into F1 literally brainwashes the F1 fans. That's the problem. It's the same way, like, the way I describe it is like, because I talk about NASCAR a lot. A lot of you guys probably don't know how NASCAR works and stuff. But I always describe Dale Earnhardt, in my opinion, the best driver in NASCAR history, as he's got the talent of a Fangio or a Schumacher or a Prost and the aura of a Senna. That's why he's the GOAT for me. My friends, the people that think Senna was overrated, were never there to see him. Hunt, Watson, Fangio all say he was the greatest of his time when he was alive. I mean, I still don't agree. On his day, he was so good and he was so transcendent, but he was inconsistent. Like Monaco 1988, the perfect example. Leading by 55 seconds, and he's just trying to show off to beat Prost. Senna is a great, but he's also the same guy that didn't want to go up against Derek Warwick. Yeah. But yeah, Dale Sr. was a beast. He was I'm an American and could care less for NASCAR. The people adored Ayrton Senna, like behind Pele, he's like the second biggest sportsman in Brazil. That's a problem. I mean, I think Pele's one of the greatest footballers of all time, but it's also this weird glazing, not just Formula One fans, but like Kimi Antonelli said in an interview like the other month that Senna is his hero. Like, motherfucker, you were born in 2006. Like, come on, don't lie. You can say Hamilton or Verstappen. We're not gonna kill you. NASCAR was awesome before the drug addict took over. I assume you were talking about what's his face? Which France is it? It's Brian, isn't it? Or Jim France? I'm not sure which one it is. Anyway, next up is Nigel Mansell. You see, he's underrated in some ways. He went up against a multitude of different teammates and was decent against all of them, apart from Prost. But also, and I also think he could have won more championships had he stayed, for example, in Williams in 1994 and 95, which I've talked about. But he also has moments like where he lost to Piquet in 87. He lost to him in 86 again. He, despite having very similar reliability records, he wasn't much better than Rosberg. He lost to De Angelis at Lotus again. He was not favoured. He was the opposite of favoured. But he lost to too many teammates to really consider him underrated. What do you think of Alan Kulwicki's 92 title win? Fantastic. Like, the fact that he won in his own team and then every other driver from that era tried to go to their own team to see how easy it was, and it wasn't easy, is good. I think Davey Allison deserves the 1992 Winston Cup more than Bill Elliott. Yeah. Because Lotus couldn't afford to support two drivers back then. Nigel was a British Senna, or steady but strong in certain situations. Bigger douche by far than... Oh, yeah. I've heard his personality was really lacking and really arrogant. But again, on his day, he was fantastic. But he also lost to several teammates. So I'm going to put him in the slightly overrated tier. Just in the likes of... around the likes of Farina and Hunt. Because he was a similar version to Hunt. I think he was a slightly better version of Hunt. Next up is Michael Schumacher. I think Michael Schumacher is fairly rated. And I'm going to say fairly rated because I think that it balances out, because there are some people who say he is the greatest of all time and he is transcendent above everyone else. And there are some people who say he's a cheater and he doesn't even deserve to be in the top 10 because he cheated a couple of times. Schumacher is a very polarising driver, and I think because those two poles kind of come together in the middle, I think he's fairly rated. Do I think he's more fairly rated than Stewart? No, because I think it's too polarising to put him in fairly rated. I'm not going to put him in slightly underrated because I don't think he's an underrated driver. You can't be underrated and be a 7-time champion. But also, he's not overrated because that indicates that he wasn't as good as 7 championships. Michael fairly rated. Nothing wrong with saying Schumacher is the greatest. I mean, I disagree. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think it's a bit of a... It's not stale, but milquetoast opinion. Jacques Villeneuve. Again, this is a tough one because there are people who think he's overrated because he was an undeserving champion, and there are people who think he's underrated because of some of like his daring moves and stuff like that. He was very good in 1996. He was very good in 1997, even if he wasn't as good as Schumacher, who was doing wonders in a worse car. He was good in 1998. He was good in 2001. But other than that, I mean, you could argue he just didn't care about Formula 1 when the groove tyres came about and stuff like that. Michael Schumacher overrated as fuck because Montoya and Raikkonen were always big threats to him. They weren't. Always. So for 2 years. In 2001 and 2003. And in 2003, the McLaren and Williams were arguably better cars than the Ferrari at points. Nezo's F1 Grid Box. Outside the scope of this stream, but will you ever do any video on underrated drivers? Mika Salo. I did a video on Mika Salo. Guys that had promise but never got a real shot were very successful outside F1. I could do that. Senna beat Schumacher in a worse car in 1993. No, the McLaren was the second best car of 1993. People don't realise that car had the most aids behind behind the Williams. It had traction control. I think it had ABS, and I think did it have an automatic? No, sorry, did it have an automatic gearbox? I think that might be the only thing it didn't have. But aside from the Williams, it was the best. It was the most advanced car. But yeah, back to Jacques Villeneuve. I think again, this is a similar situation to Schumacher, where the detractors kind of balance out the praisers. I'm gonna put him in fairly rated. Actually, no, I'm gonna put him in slightly again because I think also his perception is also based on his outlandish comments in the media, which although sometimes they go over the line, such as just saying that Robert Kubica made a joke of Formula 1 because disabled people shouldn't be in Formula 1. But he also said stuff like Daniel Ricciardo wasn't good enough for Formula 1 and essentially killed off Ricciardo's career, which I'm very grateful for. Irvine beat Schumacher in 1999. No, we didn't. They were equal on points when Schumacher got his leg break. And when he came back, Schumacher went a second quicker than Irvine in qualifying in Malaysia. So, yeah. Jacques is quite underrated, I know. I mean, the thing is, he was too inconsistent, and when he was good, he wasn't great. Mika Hakkinen. I mean, it was unfortunate. In my video, Mika Hakkinen, in the best driver in every season, didn't get any titles because I gave it to Schumacher in '98 and to Frentzen in 1999. But he was definitely a championship caliber driver and definitely, I think, slightly underrated. Behind guys like Fangio, but ahead of PK, I'd say. Because he was, on his day, he could take it to Schumacher. He was more inconsistent than Schumacher, especially in 1999. Obviously, Schumacher wasn't racing, but he was inconsistent in 99. But he could, on his day, properly do well. Then Alonso. Again, Alonso has such a large fan base that he has a large fan base and he has a large group of detractors. He's better than 2 championships. I mean, in my reality, he got 4 in the best driver in every season. But it's a case of, do the detractors outweigh the praisers? I think he's slightly underrated, but I wouldn't put him as much as the guys like Jenson Button. Let me just have a look at this 1999 season, by the way, because this Iceman geezer is trying to tell me, hold on, 1999 Formula 1 World Championship. So, after France, so the race before Schumacher got injured, Schumacher had 32 points to Irvine's 26. We don't count Silverstone because Schumacher literally broke his leg in that race. So I don't know how you're saying that he factually got more points than Irvine got factually more points than Schumacher. Alonso in 2015 also had many bad luck. Alonso, terrible person, insane driver, always choosing the wrong team at wrong. I won't call Alonso a terrible person, just bad at picking his battles. Raikkonen, quite underrated. I think he has to go in that tier. Not as much as like people like Rosberg, but I put him on the same caliber as someone like Scheckter or Hint. Hakkinen was best in 1998, was very consistent. I heard also that the reason why I didn't put him there was because I also heard that the Ferrari of 1998 was not as good as the McLaren yet Schumacher took it to a title decider. Then Lewis Hamilton. This guy has to go in one of the overrated tiers, but which one? You see, if I listen to the modern crowd, he's in quite overrated. If I balance out, if I say that the modern crowd and the Glazers all come together, then he probably goes into slightly overrated. But the thing is, again, this is a similar situation to Alonso. He has such a big fan base and such a big detractor base that it's hard to do. It's hard to say whether the fan opinion of him is more favourable or whether it's less favourable. Do his fans weigh more than his detractors? I think they do. So I think he's quite overrated. Lewis is quite overrated just because, again, I'm pretty sure you guys, this is basically what my channel's become known for. For quote unquote hating on certain drivers. Oh, okay, right. So we're gonna not go on that one, but we'll go on. I'm getting annoyed at this point, but I'm not even going to show it because there's no point in me getting annoyed at this. Where was the Formula 1 World Champions? There it is. Oh, it stayed. Thank God it stayed. Let me get rid of that advert because I'm not sure if you guys can see it. Hold on. Give us a sec. There we go. Hamilton may be slightly overrated, to be honest. Lewis Hamilton, he does get overrated by his fans. Between Alonso, Raikkonen, Hamilton and Vettel, none of them stands out. Yeah, that's the problem. I said this in my best driver from every season video. People like Vettel, Alonso, Raikkonen, they all had Hamilton, they all had a similar amount of championships. Lewis's mains end the stream, do it off stream. Nah, I can't do that. Lewis's main skill has been his ability to right team at the right time. His 07 season was kind of a fluke if you know the backstory and how it played out. Yeah, this is the thing with Lewis. If I go through his career, 2007, he's favoured in that team. I don't care what anyone says. Like, Ron Dennis has openly admitted it. And with his, he had much more favourable reliability than Alonso. 2008 he beats Kovalainen, well done I guess. 2009 he loses to Kovalainen in the first half of the year, and then when the car gets good, okay, he battered him, but that's not really an excuse. 2010 he's not much better than Button. 2011 he gets battered by Button. 2012 he's one of his best seasons, I'll give him that. 2013 he's not much better than Rosberg. I don't think he was better than Rosberg in 2013. They were both pretty equal. 2014 he was better, if only slightly. 2015 he was miles better and it was his best season ever. 2016 he was crap. 2017 he was decent, better than Vettel. 2018 he was also decent, better than Vettel. 2019 he was worse than Verstappen. 2020 he was worse than Verstappen. 2021 he was worse than Verstappen. And then 2022 to 2024 he's been washed. Not even a Lewis fanboy, but you don't know politics. Prost was a master of politics. I know he was a master of politics, but the thing is, Prost's politics were he would make sure he's a number one driver at a team. Lewis can't do that. Lewis has only ever been number one driver against Bottas, even arguably against Kovalainen, because Kovalainen was beating him in the parts of 2009. He wasn't really number two. Lewis just doesn't command number one driver status over most of his teammates because he just doesn't outperform them. People always forget how in 2007 Alonso struggled to adapt to the Bridgestones. Yeah, it's because because he'd been spent 5 years on Michelins and they get handled completely differently. And Lewis had been on Bridgestones for his entire junior career, pretty much, or for his 2006 GP2 season anyway, and all his testing in the McLaren during the winter. Yeah, so yeah, Lewis has a lot of things going in his favour. Another thing, I actually worked this out earlier on. I think in his entire career, Lewis has had 18 retirements from races that weren't his fault. That's literally an average of about 1 a season. And there was like 5 or 6 seasons where Lewis has had no mechanical retirements or any retirements that weren't his fault. He has, of all of the drivers, I've always said this in podcasts and stuff, you look at any driver who has more than about 5 starts in Formula 1 history, Lewis Hamilton has the highest finishing rate of all of them. 07, I disagree. Alonso pissed off the team. People like Lewis was being favoured by day one. But the thing was, like, how do you explain, what's it called? Lewis breaking rules in Hungary. He you know how Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen had that thing in Austria 2018 where was it Daniel refused to do the toe? Lewis refused to do the toe or refused to be the driver in front in Hungary. And so Alonso, that was why Alonso got him back with the holding him up. But the grid penalty that Alonso got, I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% certain on this, people can correct me if they want to, but I'm pretty sure in that instance Ron Dennis asked for Alonso to be given a penalty. I'm pretty sure, or someone from McLaren asked for Alonso to be given a penalty. Lewis has had so many scandals. He had the lying scandal in Australia 2009, and he can only win. He can only win in the best car. And I know people say, "Oh well, you can only win." Like that's how Formula 1 works. But he can only do well. I mean, fastest car. 2009, 2011, 2022, 23, 24. Proof that when he's not in the best car, he does not do well at all. There was tension even before then. There was tension even before then because of the Monaco thing where Alonso, I think they put team orders in just so they didn't race around Monaco because that'd be a stupid idea. But it was like Europe where Lewis got put back onto the circuit. Like people said, oh, he was in the firing line. Well, what about the other 5 cars that were in the firing line? And there was one guy who was like on the edge of a gravel trap. What about those guys? Had he been a better driver in 2007 and Massa against Lewis in 08, Lewis wouldn't have won it. I agree. If it had not sabotaged Raikkonen, Ferrari, that is, then Lewis wouldn't have won the title. Seb Vettel did win in the Toro Rosso and an average 2015 car. We'll get to Vettel in a minute, but I think Lewis is quite overrated for those reasons. And I'm not a hater. People seem to think that I'm a hater. Like people on the DRS Train podcast, or not people, not the fellow host, but the commenters seem to think I'm a hater. I'm not a hater. I just I think he's overrated, and I'm allowed to have an opinion that doesn't glaze him. I'm allowed to have an opinion that is based fully in fact. It's not based on hearsay. It's not based on, oh, I just don't like him. It's not based on race. It's not based on gender. It's not based on anything. It's based on actual statistics, actual facts, anecdotal evidence, and a lot of other things. Can't argue that he rarely tries in a way he's not in a quick car. The McLaren was 3 seconds slower than the Williams and even a second off the Benetton at times, yet Senna still beat Schumacher. The McLaren was 3 seconds slower than the Williams. 3 seconds? Are you joking me? It was at best maybe a second or 2. 3 seconds? It wasn't. That was not a gap that ever happened. Mika is overrated as is Kimi. I'll give over. JV was mismanaged and underrated. I would have won much better giving better cars. He was in the fastest car in 1997, I'd like to point out, Jacques Villeneuve, by a country mile and still nearly lost the title to Schumacher. Massa is another guy that's a pure number 2 driver. The reason he didn't win in 08. I wouldn't say he's a pure number 2 driver. He's not bad. He's just not overly great. I remember he spent a lot of the 2010s in the midfield struggling to overtake a washed Schumacher and other shit drivers. I'm not sure who he's talking about there. Lewis, that is. I mean, yeah. Jacques made the stupid mistake of not believing Craig Pollex's empty promises that BR were going to win their first race and first title. I mean, yeah. But still, I don't think Jacques Villeneuve was that good. Anyway, back to Sebastian Vettel. Again, I've seen people call Vettel top 5 drivers of all time, and he's not. I'd go slightly overrated. There are some people who do, oh, not again. It's happening even more frequently now. But luckily it should come back up again. Yeah. So Vettel, I think, does go slightly underrated because people are starting to come around to the fact that he wasn't very good in Ferrari and he was carried by the cars in Red Bull a little bit. 2011, 2013 he was fantastic, but I do still think he was slightly overrated. Mika is top 10, says the Iceman. I disagree, just for his inconsistency. Drivers have to be consistent for me to be able to be in that tier. Nico Rosberg, I don't know how this guy is. People talk about equal machinery. He beat Lewis in equal machinery. He had a good season when Lewis had a shit season. I don't know how people can't see that. And I love how people say, oh, Lewis lost 2016 because of Malaysia. No, he didn't. Rosberg had worse reliability in terms of mechanical failures in races. Monaco and Canada. Monaco, he had brake fade when he could have won, and in Canada he had some sort of, I can't remember what the issue was, but he lost 27 points over that season due to mechanical issues in races, and Lewis lost 25 points. Yet Lewis fans go, Malaysia, Sepang. He lost it because of Sepang. No, he didn't. But yeah, Rosberg, the thing is, this is what I don't get about people who like glaze Rosberg and say, oh, he was an underrated driver. Because before Mercedes became the best car on the grid by a country mile, he was fairly rated. Like, he was quite well rated because he'd done well in Williams and he got a couple of podiums and he'd done half well against Schumacher. But he wasn't considered like a World Championship caliber driver. It was only when he got in the best car that he really stepped up to kind of be somewhat to that level. He doesn't have longevity, but was amazing in his peak. Rosberg is fairly rated. I disagree. I think he's at least slightly overrated. Because Lewis fans, the more that Lewis fans glaze Rosberg, the better it makes Lewis look. So I'm going to put, I don't think he's as overrated as like the guys like Vettel or Senna, but I do think he's overrated because people seem to think that he was genuinely like this underrated driver who should have won more championships and stuff like that. Max Verstappen, I think it's similar to Schumacher and Villeneuve because there are a lot of detractors. He has a massive fan base and he has a massive detractor base. He is undoubtedly the best driver since Schumacher. He is undoubtedly the best driver on the current grid by a country mile. He is undoubtedly the next guy who's going to break all the records. He was linked to top teams as a second. Verstappen is the real deal. I'll just say Verstappen's fairly rated. But I think because of his polemic kind of thing, he's got to go around where Schumacher is. Mike Hawthorne. Again, people only know Mike Hawthorne. Like, Drive to Survive fans don't know who Mike Hawthorne is. They might know him as the first British champion, but that's it. I think he's quite overrated. Actually, no, slightly overrated. Because people don't realise... but there are some people who realise, yes, he wasn't as good as Moss in 1958. But he just, 3 wins. 1 title. He just wasn't it. He won a race of the century in 1953. And apart from that, he wasn't really overly... for me, Max is better than Alonso, Lewis and Vettel. I agree. Moss deserved the 58 championship. He did deserve a 58 championship. I'm going to put Hawthorne in slightly overrated. Phil Hill, also slightly overrated, just because he's a champion. He's a champion and he didn't deserve to be. He went up against Wolfgang von Trips for a title. I mean, come on. If Moss was in that car, he'd be beating him over the head with a spanner. Graham Hill, quite underrated in my opinion, because he was in the shadow of Jim Clark. He wasn't as good as Jim Clark, but in his prime, at Monaco, he's the one who robbed Clark of all of the good success at Monaco. Clark, I don't think, ever got a pole position or a race win around Monaco. Hill basically swept that place up during his prime. Moss and Hawthorne both won 1958 IMO, but I mean, again, I don't think Hawthorne was necessarily undeserving of a 1958 title. He still did well. I just think Moss was more deserving. I think Graham Hill is quite underrated. Not as much as Rins, not as much as Raikkonen, not as much as Scheckter. I'll actually put Scheckter behind Raikkonen. But I do think that Graham Hill is massively underrated. He's a triple crown on motorsports. I know we're doing this on purely F1 form, but he was genuinely behind Clark, second best driver on the grid. Hamilton over Verstappen, but Verstappen over the others. No, for me, Lewis is right. Like this is what I've always talked about. You look at the drivers in my top 10. So my top 10, because we've pretty much got all the way through, I can now say it. Fangio first, Prost second, Clark third, Schumacher fourth, Lauda fifth, Senna sixth, Verstappen seventh, Stewart eighth, Hamilton ninth, and Hill 10th. So Graham Hill 10th. The reason why Hamilton is below them for me is because you look at all of those guys. You look at all of the times they lost to their teammates that weren't also in the top 10. So Clark going against Hill doesn't count against Hill because he's also a top 10 driver. You look at all of the times that they lost to drivers who weren't also in the top 10. The only driver, and I mean only driver who on merit, either in points or in merit, lost across the season to a teammate was Niki Lauda losing to John Watson in 1982 and 1983. Lewis Hamilton has lost, he equaled Fernando Alonso in 2007. He lost to Jenson Button in 2011. He lost to Nico Rosberg in 2016. He lost to George Russell in 2022, and he lost to George Russell in 2024. And that's what doesn't... Lewis is too inconsistent. As in his prime, 2015, 2012, 2000... I can't really think of any other good, properly dominant seasons he's had. 2012 and 2015, he's fantastic. But seasons like 2009, 2011, 2022, 24, I can't put him in that because he's just too inconsistent. He's a more milquetoast version of Senna for me. Hamilton better than Stewart, and I even say that with Stewart being my second favourite driver of all time. I disagree. Because Stewart made the most of his opportunities. There was no time where you thought he hasn't extracted the full potential from his car. He was third place in his debut season with BRM in 1965. He was... he got podiums and race wins and championships with Tyrrell. And as soon as he left, they fell off a cliff. Wait, Nedzo, Jim Clark is third in your list. I thought you said he is number one in the past. I did say he was number one in the past, but my opinions have changed. Because I find new information, I do more research, I do all this other stuff, and I change my opinions. Jim Clark. I mean, we've got to Jim Clark now. I think he's slightly underrated. Slightly. Because even the Drive to Survive fans know who he is. And there are a lot of glazers of him. Don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people who say he's like the best by an absolute country mile and all that sort of stuff. I think his longevity does make him a bit harder to rank because he didn't have the longevity that guys like Fangio have had. I know they did the same amount of seasons, but in terms of Clark was only championship level from 1962 until 68. And it was only like one race in 68, so it was 62 and 67. Personally, I don't like ranking drivers because of this. You're working with so many caveats, and I say post-90s has been the era of team dominance. See, I disagree with that. People talk about how, you can't rank drivers between different eras because they're different. And it's like, well, don't treat them as different. You take the guys from the 50s who were really good and you say, how good were they against the other guys from the 50s? And then you take the guys from the 60s, like you take Fangio and Ascari. Fangio and Ascari were a level above Farina, Hawthorne, Musso, Castellotti, Moss. They were a level above them, all of them, let's be honest. And then you look at the guys from the 60s, Clark and Hill were a level above guys like Brabham, Hill, the other Hill, Phil Hill, John Surtees, Denny Hulme, guys like that. I mean, look at the 70s, Lauda was ahead of all of the champions from the 70s. Prost and Senna and Mansell and Piquet were... I mean, Prost and Senna and Piquet were a level above everyone else in the 80s. You look at them and you look how better were they than all their other guys. I don't see why people say, oh, you can't compare eras. That's just that. I think for me, oh, you can't compare between different eras is a cop-out for people to say, actually, I don't know enough about these eras, so I'm going to not rank them. And if they want to say that, that's fine. If Drive to Survive fans say, I don't know anything about the 1950s, therefore I don't know how to rate Fangio, and I can't rate Fangio in the GOAT tier, that's fine. But it's when people try and make up bullshit like, oh, I can't rank these guys, or they try and discredit guys from the 1950s because they say like, oh, they were just old people and princes and there was no quality control and they were just not good. When the truth is they would be faster in those cars than Verstappen and Hamilton would be, because Hamilton and Verstappen would crash into a tree trying to push too hard to try and go fast. But yeah, John Surtees is the last one on this list. And I'd say he's fairly rated because some people say he's underrated, but I don't see it because it took for Graham Hill to be taken out of the championship contention in 1964 by Lorenzo Bandini for him to actually win anything. But didn't you say Jim Clark was the best F1 driver for 7 years? You said he should have won 7 titles, which made me surprised you ranked him third and not first. But the thing was, that ranking every driver, see, that's not a perfect ranking of who's the best because Schumacher won, I think, 9 titles in that reality, and Fangio won, what was it, 7, 6, and that's because he only had a couple of years. Like, career length also plays a massive part into that. You can, but I wouldn't. It's not cop out. It's acknowledging the effects of the car. I disagree because I just see all the cars as the same. Like, yes, the 1950s cars were hard to handle because you could die. The 1960s cars were temperamental and they were unreliable and you had to manage your machinery. The 1970s cars were much of the same. And then progressively it's turned into how you drive the cars at the edge of a limit of grip. But there's different ways to say that certain drivers, certain eras were better than others. But there is no golden era of Formula 1. People say, oh, I think the golden era of Formula 1 is the 1960s or the 1990s or the 2000s. And it just so happens to coincide with whatever era you grew up in or whatever era was slightly before where you grew up in. And that for me is why I don't see it as... that's why there's no golden era of Formula 1 for me. Hill got more points in 1964 than Surtees. He did, and yeah, Surtees needed Bandini to help him. Not that they're easier to drive, but in terms of team dominance being more locked in, I know nowadays, because of a restriction in terms of rules and regulations, teams are more likely to dominate now than they were, because 50 years ago they'd come up with some sort of radical new design idea and then the teams would shuffle around. But 1990s and 2000s were the golden eras. They weren't. Like, the 2000s had several years where like overtaking was awful, and 1990s again similar. It's just because most people grew up in that era because, or they look back on it because of the engine sounds or because of the liveries or because of the drivers. And the truth is, there's no golden era because they all have different things that are great about them. The 2020s have the fastest cars in history. The 2010s have probably some of the biggest competition in terms of close championships. The 2000s has the V10s and the screaming engines and the great liveries and the peak of technology and all that sort of stuff. And 1990s had traction control and they had Senna and Prost and the big fights that Schumacher and Hill had and all that sort of stuff. And the 1980s had Senna and Prost again, and they had Lauda, and they had a bit still that kind of gladiator feel because drivers were still dying. And 1970s was just ragged on the edge because the cars were too fast for the safety, and the 1960s were temperamental because they were also too fast for safety. And 1950s were like, this is just, you're gonna die. 5 different champions in 2010. I still place Clark ahead of the rest. His record versus the rest of the grid that era is so stark. So is Fangio's more so because he was just so much better than everyone else. But beyond that, there were just so many miracle drivers. Is that Keke Rosberg and extremely underrated? Yes. F1 has been great forever. It has been. Surtees, though, is underrated. As a driver, very fast, but his own worst enemy politically and mechanically. I wouldn't know politically and mechanically because I'm not a full connoisseur of the 1960s, especially John Surtees. But, I mean, he went to Honda and he left Ferrari in acrimonious circumstances. I know he went to Cooper and then to Honda, but yeah, that's all I know really of him. I maintain it's the 60s and 2000s. Of course, the others had good stuff. Post 08 and 09 has been a big downturn in quality of show and showcase of boring tech and quiet cars. See, I know a lot of people talk about how Formula 1 needs good sound and stuff. I like, obviously when the turbo hybrids came in 2014, they sounded awful. But now they don't sound awful, they're just a bit quiet, and I don't really mind that. Like, yes, ideally you want to see screaming V10s and everyone wants to not be able to talk to the person next to them when they're all on track, but in reality it's not a massive deal for me, especially. Like, would I prefer to have screaming V10s? Absolutely. But is it a be all and end all? No. Because if you need screaming engines to detract from the fact that your racing is bad, like it was in the early 2000s, then that's just a cop-out in my opinion. F2 had far too much focus on safety. No, I disagree. I'd rather safe cars that produce boring 1-by-1 races all the time than have a driver die or have a driver be injured. F2 had KERS. That was outlawed and then mandated. F1 had KERS, then was outlawed. KERS should be brought back because the problem is with DRS is very linear, and you can't, like, it's always either not powerful enough or too powerful because you can't actually predict how powerful it's going to be. And it produces DRS trains. KERS is driver activated, and it's all on the driver and how he uses it, or she uses it, or it uses it. They should do it like IndyCar has, because IndyCar has 250 seconds of push to pass every race, and you can choose to use it all in the first 5 laps or the last 5 laps. But if you get a safety car midway through the race and you've used it all, you're screwed. I think that's what they should do. Formula One DRS. I mean, they're already getting rid of DRS, which is good, but they should be focusing more on energy deployment because that's where we're going in terms of real life road tech. But yeah, I'd much rather like processional races than having drivers die. Formula One isn't too safe. It's updating, and I mean, it's too safe in the sense that they're making the cars weigh 500 million tons. But that's the only way it's too safe, because they're trying to go for crumple zones and stuff like that. But that's going back. We've got the list here of all the drivers who are underrated, overrated, and I think I'm happy with that. Damon Hill for me is extremely overrated. Lewis Hamilton, Jack Brabham, Alberto Ascari, and Emerson Fittipaldi quite overrated. Drivers should be allowed to use DRS wherever they want to. Imagine it being like used on the Suzuki S's or Maggots and Beckett's. No, because you just have accidents and it would be dangerous. I believe that, for example, they should have like multiple more DRS zones per lap. Like every straight is a DRS zone, but like the reason why that's banned is because like Monaco 2011, Perez activated DRS in the tunnel at Monaco and he had a massive crash, and like that's why they banned, because in 2011 they allowed DRS at every part of the circuit and people just crashed. I don't want drivers killed, hurt. Doesn't change the fact that danger is an inherent attraction to motorsport. It is an inherent attraction to motorsport, but you can't. There is no way to balance it between drivers are slightly in danger but not enough to kill them, because eventually it's going to go wrong. That's what happened with Bianchi. That's what happened with Senna and Ratzenberger. I don't know, Senna and Ratzenberger was negligence, but that's what happened with Bianchi, because it was borderline in terms of whether they deployed the virtual safety car or the safety car, or whether they did something else. And I don't want that, because because it's never cut and dry with Formula One, and that's why I believe that shouldn't happen. Are you going to rank those who finished runner-up? I mean, I can, but I have a worry that this tier list is going to go kaput again and I'll have to put them all in. I'll put them in, but if the tier list goes kaput, I won't be happy. Tier list. I'll put these all in now. So here we are. There are the guys, and then I'll add the 2 more because the way it pops up in my... There we go. Are you going to do an overrated and underrated midfield drivers on the next F1 live stream? I don't think so. I don't think there's much demand for that. 70s to 90s tracks look so much harder to drive because of how much higher the curbs were. Yeah, but also nowadays you couldn't do that because it would just destroy the cars. Like they had a lot more flexibility back then, and also the racing was less tight because it just was like there was very rare. That overtaking was a lot rarer, and the racing was less close, and there was less field spread. So having high curbs nowadays, not only does it send cars into the air, but it's also just a disaster in general. So yeah, drivers who finished number 2 in the standings. I think this might be in chronological order, reverse. So we'll go... Oh, it's not actually, because there's guys on the bottom who aren't there. But Lando Norris. I think he's fairly rated. I think people are finally... Like, there are people who say... I mean, there are Norris fangirls who go, oh, the McLaren team didn't support him in 2024, and people are just being unkind. Why would you be unkind to him when he talks about his mental health and is like, no, you're allowed to criticise a driver for being awful. But there's also... I think that people have now realised that he's not the worst driver in the world, and that 2024 was a bit of a blip in the matrix, but he needs to recover in 2025. Bring back the Singapore Sling curb solved. I mean, I would like the Singapore Sling to come back, but I don't think it will. Leclerc is slightly underrated in my opinion. Not as much as guys like Hulme, but he's just slightly underrated. I think he is championship level. Norris is number 2 at a number 1 team. I don't get how people say that because Piastri did worse than him last year. Like, Norris was bottling a championship. Piastri could barely even get wins. I don't see how people act like Piastri is better because he wasn't. Felipe Massa, I think is fairly rated. Because people realise he wasn't really championship calibre, but also he wasn't awful at the same time. If Norris doesn't improve in 2025, then there is no hope for him. I agree. David Coulthard, again, is fairly rated because people realise he wasn't championship calibre, but he was still quite good. Eddie Irvine, I think, is slightly overrated because in 1999 people act like he was the Ferrari was clearly the best car. Like, Schumacher came back and was instantly a second lap quicker than him, and only gave him the win in Malaysia to help him with the title. 2024 was one of the worst performances I've seen from a number 2. I'm assuming you mean from a number 2 in the championship. Yeah. So I think Irvine's overrated because he just wasn't very good in 1999, and people seem to think he was. People like, oh, he was number 2 to Schumacher for the first half of the season. Well, he wasn't for the second half, and that car was the fastest car on the grid. And Hakkinen was crashing all the time. It was funny when he didn't win, but come on, guys. DC, the consummate number 2 driver, yeah. Piastri is far less experienced. He is far less experienced, but he was in his second season. And, this is what I've always said. Like, drivers who are truly great do well in their first or second season, like your Hamiltons, like your Vettels, like your Verstappens. They are already on the thing by the second season. It's like the same thing with Norris. People saying, oh, he hasn't had a chance in a championship winning car. He's had 5 seasons. Yes, they aren't in a championship winning car, but you have experience, so you shouldn't be faltering. Riccardo Patrese, I'd say fairly rated. Like, he was a very experienced driver who just so happened to get into a Williams when it was the fastest car on the grid. Michele Alboreto, I'd say is slightly underrated. His 1985 season was fantastic, I'd just like to point out. His 1985 season was fantastic. And was kind of, not unlucky, but just kind of not fully championship level. Irvine was in a title fight because of circumstances, yes. Perez, I'm going to put Perez in slightly underrated as well, purely because people seem to think that now he had a bad few years in Red Bull, that he was instantly just always an awful driver, and they look at stuff like against Kobayashi and stuff and they say, was he actually a lot worse than we thought of all this time? Like, was he so much worse than Hulkenberg and stuff? It's like, no. Like Perez from 2011 to 2020 was very good. Even 2021 was very good. It's just he faltered in the ground effect cars. Next up is Didier Pironi. I'd say is slightly underrated because he was better than Gilles Villeneuve in my opinion. And that's a hot take, but he was better than him in 1982 before they both had their accidents. Meanwhile, Gilles Villeneuve, I've got to do it. I have to do it. He is quite overrated. People talk about he was a lost champion. He had a chance to win a championship in 1979. He didn't take it. And people say, oh, well, he was told to sit behind Scheckter. No, he wasn't. There are several races in 1979 where he won and Scheckter was behind him on the track. So that's just a lie. And he had good moments. 1981 Harama, where he held 5 cars behind him. But people talk about stuff like, I think it was 1981 Zandvoort, where he had 3 tyres on his car because he got a puncture, and instead of driving slowly back to the pits like everyone else, he tried to get back to the pits as fast as possible and wreck the tyres and wreck the bodywork. Not whereas he was just destroying his car and was just ruining his car. In Canada, people was like, oh, he was using his peripheral vision to get around the circuit because there was a front wing in front of his car. I don't believe it. I believe he could still see just a little bit and was fine because I'm sorry, you can't use your peripheral vision to see around you in those sort of monsoon conditions. Not in 1980s cars. You can't. You just can't. It's not possible. Like, he had a chance to win a championship, he didn't. He was better than Scheckter in 1980. Oh my god, because he drove on three wheels at the Netherlands, he's so good. Yeah, that's what I don't see it. I don't get it. I don't get it. How people glaze you over. I think I saw like a ranking of, I can't remember if it was the race or if it was some other motorsport magazine, but they said he was the second best Grand Prix driver of all time. Like, no. Carlos Reutemann is quite underrated. Actually, slightly underrated. I'd put him in that category because he was championship caliber. He should have won 1981, but he wasn't world beating. Who is that? That's Tony Brooks on the right, but who's this? I don't know who that is. Is it Wolfgang von Trips? I think that might be Wolfgang von Trips. And, I mean, that perfectly sums up Wolfgang von Trips' career. I don't know. I can't pick him out. Yeah, I can't pick him out. So that is von Trips. Overrated, because people know him for challenging Phil Hill for a title, and we already know Phil Hill wasn't a championship caliber driver. So I wish Alex Wirtz got more of a chance. That's a bit random, but I mean, I sort of agree. Tony Brooks, slightly underrated. A lot of drivers are slightly underrated, I'd just like to point out. I mean, I don't know, I'll put him in fairly rated because he had chances to win titles, but he didn't. Jose Froilan Gonzalez. Again, no one really knows who he is. I'd also say fairly rated because no one knows who he is and no one really cares. That's a problem. Ferrari's first winner. On his day, he was really fast. Like, he could beat Fangio on his day, but because he was so hyper aggressive, he had a hyper aggressive driving style, so he often couldn't get right to the limit. Bottas, less said the better. Slightly overrated, just because people seem to think that because he could beat Lewis in qualifying a couple of times, that he was a really good driver. Rubens Barrichello, I think slightly underrated for him. I know I put a lot of drivers in that tier, but people don't realise before he went to Ferrari, he was considered a future champion, and it was only because Schumacher was there that he wasn't a champion. I think he had the speed and the talent to become a champion, just not the emotional strength. I just noticed that Leclerc has two teammates in your list that are overrated: Vettel and Hamilton. Yeah, Jackie X. Jackie X. Fairly rated. I mean, he wasn't championship caliber. People say he should have won 1970. He shouldn't. Clay Regatt's only was better than him as a rookie. I'll just put him in there. Fairly rated. Sterling Moss, slightly underrated. Actually, no. I'll actually say slightly overrated because people say he's the best driver who's never won a championship. He isn't. That honour goes to not to Jules Bianchi. I don't know why I nearly said that. Goes to Dan Gurney. Moss was good, but one, too gentlemanly for his own good, and two, I mean, 1958 he should have won, but Gurney was a lot better than him as a non-champion. Noticing a pattern between driving style and being overrated. I mean, not really. And there is a bit of a pattern, but like there are several aggressive drivers who are in my underrated section. Keke Rosberg, extremely underrated. He's saying he was a smooth driver. Jody Scheckter the same. Jochen Rindt the same. People like that. Moss was a champion. I mean, people say he was a champion, but I think he was slightly overrated just because he was good and he was up one of the best drivers of the 1950s and the early 60s, but he just wasn't truly on the same caliber as some of the guys around him. Next one is that's Clay Regazzoni, and I've also just realised I've missed Ronnie Peterson off this list. I think. Let me just quickly go and get a picture of... Do I have a picture of Ronnie Peterson? Let me just check. I'll get a picture of Ronnie Peterson because I've missed him. There we go. Regazzoni, I think, is fairly rated. He was just kind of there or thereabouts. There's a different girls. Why is Rosberg underrated? I'm not familiar with his career. So he starts in 1978 at Wolf alongside, I think it was James Hunt, and beat James Hunt. Admittedly, James Hunt was completely demotivated, but he did beat him. So no, I don't think he was against him, but he might have been on his own. I think he was on his own, sorry. He went to Fittipaldi in 1979 or 1980 and beat Emerson Fittipaldi on his own merit. And dragged that car to a podium at one point when it definitely didn't deserve it. And he won the 1978 International Race of Champions in a Theodore, which was a backmarker car. That was like a non-championship race at Brands Hatch. Then in 1981, I don't really remember what happened in 1981, but in 82, wins the championship in the fourth fastest car. Admittedly, probably the second best car because of reliability, but the fourth fastest car. 1983, he's better than Jacques Lafitte. 1984, he's better than... Who was his teammate in 84? It was... His teammate in 1984? Was it Lafitte again? Yeah, it was, I think. And then he beat Mantle in 85 and was only slightly worse than Prost in 86. I think that's fair PHO2 with the general public. And so who were we just on? We were on Clay Regazzoni. Yeah, fairly rated for Clay Regazzoni. Bruce McLaren, I'd say, is also fairly rated. Maybe slightly under. I don't think he's slightly underrated. I think he's fairly rated. As a kind of guy who could have been a champion but never really got the full potential. Frenton, I think, is also slightly rated because people look at his 97 season, which was awful, but then also his 99 season, which was great, so it kind of balances out. And Ronnie Peterson, I think, is quite underrated. Like, that man could have been a two-time champion. Interesting. I've always got him just that he was kind of a bum/lucky champion. He wasn't. He really wasn't. People seem to think that because he got one championship. A lot of people seem to think about over one-time champions. But guys like Scheckter, guys like Rosberg were very underrated. So that's my complete list of all the champions and vice champions in Formula 1 history. Damon Hill, extremely overrated. Don't know how he ever won a championship because he just fluked his way into a fast car for 5 seasons. Lewis Hamilton, Jack Brabham. I wholeheartedly stand by the opinions that guys like Hamilton, Villeneuve, Brabham are overrated. Senna's overrated, just not as much. Vettel is because of modern fans. Rosberg, the same. Bottas, the same. Guys like Schumacher, the guys who have lots of variants, and some people hate them, some people love them, have been probably put in the fairly rated category. Guys like Lauda and Prost who had teammates or rivals who had aura. And kind of went under the radar as a result of that. And guys like Fangio and guys from the early decades that just don't get the recognition they deserve are in the underrated categories. Raikkonen, because his stats just don't tell the story. Same with Peterson, same with Scheckter, same with Rinton, same with Graham Hill. And then very much so for Keke Rosberg. As a McLaren fan and a huge fan of Bruce in general, I wonder how McLaren would have gone if not for his accident in 70. I mean, he'd already been in F1 for about 10, 11 seasons. He was in his mid to late 30s. He was in his mid 30s by the time he died. So I don't think he'd have gone for much longer, to be honest. I think he would have probably gone to about 1973 and then he'd have retired because drivers retired at about 35, 36 back then. And he would have focused on team. I think he would have focused on team ownership anyway. So he might have even retired earlier than that. So it might have been like it wouldn't surprise me to see that to see him just retire at that point. I think Vettel is correctly rated. He's overrated and underrated by about the same. He was in his early 30s. Yeah, he was. So yeah, you guys can't see the full. I'll quickly scroll back through it again so you can have a look at it. What are you guys? Are there any guys that you think that I should be rating higher or lower or whatever? Because we've been on the stream for about 2 hours now, and I need to go to the toilet. I don't think Nico Rosberg is more overrated than Bottas. He at least challenges for title, unlike Bottas. The thing is, Bottas isn't as overrated because Bottas isn't as good. I'll give you that. but I don't think people like genuinely rate Bottas as like a future, like a potential champion. Whereas they do, like Rosberg, they say like, oh, he was so much better than Lewis, and he was. I mean, he was better than Lewis, but it wasn't because he was good. It was because Lewis was bad. Is what essentially what I'm saying. Tinkle, tinkle. Oh God. But yeah, with that, yeah, I won't end it just yet because I'll give people a chance to give their opinions. 18 viewers, by the way. Thank you everyone for watching. I will eventually make this down into a video. It'll be a long one, but it'll be a video nonetheless. Button better than Rosberg, narrowly, IMO. I mean, Jenson Button as a driver is better than Nico Rosberg, yes. But they're not in the same tier. Like Button is there and Rosberg's there. The thing is, Button actually beat Prime Lewis on merit when, although Lewis was having a bad season, it wasn't just because of pressure or whatever. It was because he was actually. Daniel Rick is slightly overrated. He ruined his career from 2021 to. He's not slightly overrated. He's quite overrated, but he's not in this list because he didn't get a second place in the standings. But yeah, it seems like everyone seems to have put all their opinions down. I'll wait for another minute or so just to see if everyone else has got everything, because I'm not under pressure to like end or anything like that. I've also just realised when I lean down, you can't actually fully see my screen, so I'm just quickly angled it down a bit further. Where would you put Kubica and Webber? Kubica, I'd put slightly overrated because although he was a future champion, people acted like he was some sort of god amongst men. I'm actually going to push my thing back to where it was because it's a bit creepy to have it that close. And Webber I'd put slightly underrated because he was very good in 2010. Ricciardo would be, as I said, yeah, quite overrated. No, Ricciardo is not slightly underrated nowadays. I still believe Jacques Villeneuve was not correct in what he said. Why? Daniel Ricciardo had one good finish in 2024, and it was Miami. Why was Jacques Villeneuve not correct? We never got to see the true potential of Kubica, but yeah, I mean, in his career, he was very good. Like, he was an upper midfield driver, and he was very good in the upper midfield, and he got a win, obviously, in Canada. But I still believe people act like he's some sort of like future multiple like time champion who was going to be better than like Hamilton and people like that, but he wasn't. Ricciardo is not slightly overrated. He's quite overrated in my opinion because he's just like for someone who's got 8 wins, he pretty much all of them were flukes. Canada 2014 was because the Mercedes blew up. Belgium 2014 was because the Mercedes blew up. Hungary 2014 was because Hamilton started from the back and it was a wet race. 2016, I'm pretty sure he got a win in 2016, didn't he? He might not have, but I know he got one. He got Baku 2017. I think Malaysia 2017 as well. But then in like Baku 2018, there was so much stuff happening in that race, and Baku 2017, yeah, he also got there. There was so much stuff going on in that race as well. Due to 1997 to 1999, maybe Michael Schumacher is slightly underrated. No, I disagree because that's a 3-year stretch in a 20-year career. He was just better than Vettel in 2014. Okay, Max was young, but he still beat him. No, he didn't. I don't know why people say that Ricciardo beat Verstappen in 2016 because he didn't. Let me get my stat sheet up. Hold on. So from Ricciardo's perspective, let me just load it up. So in 2016, against Kvyat and Verstappen, he was on average 1.2 seconds quicker in the races and 1/10 quicker in the qualifying, which does indicate that he was better. However, if you look from where was it? If you look at just look at like for example, Spain, they had to count out because of the different strategies, which is annoying. But places like there were times where Verstappen was so clear, and towards the end of the season, Verstappen was clearly the better driver, as you can see from his results. Lost Monaco in the pits in 2016. Yeah, but he also gained Monaco in 2018 because of similar things where you can't overtake. Fifth, I hate people when people use the standings to try and calculate whether drivers are better. Look at 2017. In 2017, against Verstappen, he was slower on average in both qualifying and the races. And 2018, he was slower on average in both qualifying and the races by quite a considerable margin. So, yeah, so if you look, so that's what it is. So, qualifying delta to teammate in 2017, he was a tenth slower than Verstappen on average, and then 10 seconds on average behind in the races. And then in 2018, he was 4 tenths off in qualifying, and then 12 seconds behind in the races. I don't know how people say that Ricciardo beat Verstappen when he didn't. It's overplayed how bad those late 90s Ferraris cars were. I disagree. I mean, sometimes people say, like, oh, Schumacher won in the 4th fastest car in 1996 Spain. I think it was 3rd fastest. But that 1997 Ferrari, although it was second quickest by about a second. Maybe half a second to a second. He should not have been challenging for a title in that car. 1998 was a block of cheese, but it was still like second quickest and just behind the McLaren. Hulkenberg is slightly underrated and quite underrated. I agree. Hulkenberg is quite underrated. I didn't say he was better. I just said he beat him. I think that those mean the same thing. Because to beat someone, you have to be better than them. In terms of because we didn't say in the points, we just said beat them, and I think that because you didn't clarify point standings, that's why I disagree with that. But yeah, I think that should unless anyone's I'll give anyone a couple, like a minute or two, if they want to ask me. We can do a little bit of a mini Q&A here because we've got quite a few people here. If you want to ask me a question, whether it be about the video topic or about YouTube or about whatever. Nedzo, what do you think of Montoya, Ralf Schumacher and Nick Heidfeld? Montoya, good, but too egotistical and too aggressive and too all sorts for his own good. Ralf Schumacher, in his brother's shadow, still a good driver, and Nick Heidfeld, a very good midfield stalwart. They actually don't. The better players or teams don't always win. I mean, obviously the better teams and players don't always win, but yeah. If you have any questions, whether it be about YouTube, whether it be about personal life, I don't know if I'm that interesting. But after that's done, I'll have to go because I am desperate to go to the toilet, and everyone needs to know that, don't they? Do you think Alonso and Hamilton 2025 will perform better or worse? Well, if Lewis wants to save his reputation, he has to perform better than 2024. 2024 was a disaster. 2024 for Alonso was kind of mid-tier. It was worse than 2023, but he can easily recover. But I think his age will eventually catch up to him. In the hands of JV in 97, but not sure about the race pace difference. The thing is, that Williams, I'm sorry, I genuinely think that the 1996 Williams and 1997 Williams were just as good as the 1992 and 93 Williams in terms of dominance. I just think they were misdriven by bad drivers. Not bad drivers, but non-worthy drivers. Damon Hill and a rookie Jack Villeneuve in 1996, and then Jack Villeneuve and Heinz Alfrensen in 97. Fernando Alonso may end up retiring at the end of this season, I think. No, he will not retire. He knows that Adrian Newey is coming in next year. He could finish last in the standings this year and he'd still stay on because he knows that he's got an Adrian Newey car coming next year. Unless he has a massive injury, he's not going to. Nedzo, do you practice sports? Any sports? I do a lot of sim racing. I do a lot of karting. I mean, because I'm not sure if I know people who watch the podcast will know because it comes up occasionally. But as you can see, I have a disability. My left hand and leg don't work properly because of cerebral palsy. And what I end up doing, I do karting, I do sim racing, I've done football in the past. I was the best goalkeeper in my year 11 in year 11 to school. So in my year at school. So yeah. Are you on the see you on the DRS Train Discord then? Yeah, you can see me in there if you want to. You can ask me questions and stuff. But yeah. Do you think Max Verstappen will win the 2025 title? Since Leclerc is cool-headed and Max can be hot-headed at times, and that can cause him some points. It depends. If that Red Bull is slower than that Ferrari, which I think it will be, then and it depends how much slower. Because I think that the order by the start of next year will be McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull. Or even Ferrari, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. If that Red Bull is half a second off the pace, Verstappen's not winning the title. But if it's 2 tenths off the pace, he's got a chance. He is hot-headed at times, but the thing is, Leclerc is a lot more cool-headed and a lot less error-prone than he used to be. But I think Verstappen still has the edge. He's coming in this year. However, this prediction that Alonso will retire at the end of the season is off. If he gets 2 podiums this year, even if he doesn't, as I said, Alonso could finish last in the 2025 driver standings and retire from 5 races and blow up his engine 8,000 times, and I still think he would stay in Formula 1 because he knows that car is so good. But yeah, back to the Verstappen point. Yeah, I think Verstappen in a slightly worse car is better than Leclerc in a better car. Slightly better car. Yeah. I'm just waiting to see if anyone else has got any more questions. Yeah, let's see if anyone has any more questions. I'm not sure if anyone is in an ad break or something to that nature, but go take a leak, bro. Lol. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it seems like it's been good chatting to you guys. And chatting to you and talking about underrated drivers and overrated drivers and talking about how my statistic sheets prove that I'm always right about everything in Formula 1. And that is always the thing. If you want to chat to me, I will always be in the DRS Train podcast server. And I don't have my own Discord server, but you can always comment on my YouTube videos. Go and watch my other YouTube videos if you haven't already. I know that one of you asked about the Mika Salo video. Go and watch that if you haven't already. This is Fernando Alonso. We're talking about he has 0 patience. I mean, yes, he does, but I still think that regardless, he's got enough patience to realise that Adrian Newey could give him his 3rd championship if that Aston Martin is to be good. The 1998 Ferrari was on par with the McLaren second half of the season. Again, I'm not fully clued up on this because I wasn't even born, but yeah. But yeah, I think you guys know how to reach me. I'm fairly open to that sort of stuff because I'm a small YouTuber compared to my fellow podcast hosts, Ciaron, Peter, even Nav to an extent. But yeah, to the 18 viewers watching this stream currently, that's a lot of people to watch a concurrent stream. But yeah, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed this. I might do some more stuff like this. I'm gonna compile it all into a video anyway. So you might be seeing on there. But yeah, without further ado, I'm Nedzo.